Welcome back. Today, two things. Number one, you're going to have homework. Before I forget, at the end of the lecture, there is going to be a new link there for a new homework. I am asking you for the requirements of 3 systems. And I am going to explain you about it. But at the end of my slides, at the end of the lecture, I am going to tell you exactly what 3 different systems. I am going to ask you to put the requirements in a document. You are going to submit the document or 3 documents if you prefer. But these 3 systems, individual work, you submit. The most important thing that I want to remind you is, please, it's an individual work. We review for academic integrity. I am sure that you're going to search on the internet about the systems, how they work, maybe. But please do not copy paste. In particular, I am going to ask you to do something with games that are public domain. You can go to the internet and research about those games. But if you're going to copy paste paragraphs from web pages, those are going to be reported as academic integrity. Remember, one thing is to cite like 1 line or 2 lines, important things. But when you copy paste a paragraph or more, that is not a reference. That is plagiarism, and you can have issues. In particular, in the link for the homework, I am copy paste there the academic integrity ASU webpage. If you have any question about what is considered academic integrity or plagiarism, please review, but don't do that. Probably the most important thing to do, show me that you can collect the requirements, that you can explain the requirements. Now, the most important thing for this second homework is not only to show me that you know how to put the requirements there, because that is something that you already showed me in assignment 1, right? So you know how to do it. Now, can you show me that you can collect all the requirements for one system? I am not asking you for some examples of requirements about Canvas. I am asking you for all the requirements that correspond to Canvas. I am not using Canvas because it's too big, but I am going to use some games. And those games are small pieces of software. Therefore, you can give me all the requirements. For the first time in the assignment, what we're going to review is your requirements are correct, but also you put there all the requirements for that particular system. Nothing is missing. Moreover, nothing is missing. And you put the information in the correct place as a requirement or as an activity, as functional or as a non-functional. That is the goal, right? So obviously, I am going to tell you a little bit more during the lecture, but you have homework 1 week. Good? Okay, so talking about the requirements, the previous lecture we finished with this identification of functional and non-functional. You should be expert by now identifying one category of the other. At least you have a little bit of experience and you can work with that. For your homework, I am asking you both, it's open to you, but mostly the ones that are going to cover your homework are the functional requirements. I am asking you for all the functional requirements in those systems. The non-functionals, if you can identify some of them, if you know some of them, good to go. But there are going to be some projects in which the non-functional do not exist, or you do not have a way to know it. So it could be empty, the non-functional. But I am not telling you to ignore the non-functional. I am telling you some of those systems do not have, or maybe you do not know, or you do not have a way to know the non-functional. The focus of the homework is in the functional requirements. But if you mention something that is non-functional, be sure to put that in a different category, in a different place. Do not mix them, right? That's it. Now, previous lecture, we were talking about the non-functional. I just want to finish with the examples. I show you 1 slide of examples. If you review my slides, you notice there is a second one that we didn't have the opportunity to review previously, this one. So number 9 is a correct requirement. Moreover, can we put that one in functional or in a non-functional category? Everyone agrees that it's non-functional is a quality or a constraint. In this particular case, a constraint regarding the format to use. And it's a requirement, follow all the INVEST principles. It is valuable can be negotiated with the customer, have a value for the customer, clear, small, can be tested, can be estimated. And hopefully all of that is like, yes. 10.
It's a non-functional. You cannot define a requirement on the basis of easy. You need to define the easy, and it becomes a function. It's a non-functional.
Agree with most of the things that you mentioned. Number one, if we can do that one to become a requirement, that one is going to be non-functional. It's going to be. Now, it is not a requirement, reviewing the letters in best, because we can have an issue with the part that, okay, that one is going to be negotiable. And the issue that we have, as we discussed before, is the adjectives, right? When we talk about easy, remember, red light. I am not telling you that the adjective makes this wrong. I am telling you red light. The question is easy. What can I do to evaluate easy? What do you mean by easy? That is something that should be explained, that should be put in a more clear way. If you replace this easy with something more specific, then we can make that one a requirement, and therefore non-functional one. Clear, the easy, and the easy is an issue. 11. It's a tricky one, right? It's functional, it's non-functional. What the user is trying to tell me.
Non-functional, sir, because he says that it shall reside in the program source code. That is an extra detail which is not required. So
remember that there was different things to think about it between functional and non-functional. And I think that the most important thing here is like the idea that it's not going to be one person doing this, right? It's going to be the team. And it's going to be the team because it's not really one functionality service or reaction to implement, but it's mostly about something that you can consider a constraint or a quality. The constraint about how things are going to be done, or the quality regarding, okay, it's going to be easy to modify this, modificability in some way in terms of the language. Thinking about how many people are going to be involved, thinking about quality or constraint, this guy is going to become a non-functional one. Now, remember, always, the non-functionals are going to have connected, maybe, functionals in order to be able to present this thing. When we talk about the format in 2 decimals, obviously that format is the non-functional, but that is going to impact when you work in functionals. If we talk about easy to use, that one is about non-functional, but that is going to impact how the developers create functional ones. So the non-functionals, as we mentioned before, in the whiteboard, is going to impact the project. But obviously, down, they are going to impact in one way or another the functionality, the service, and so on. But in general, this one is about constraint. It's about quality. It's a non-functional one. Just like the previous one and the previous one.
Notice it's one of the longer requirements. So would it be worth it all? Why earlier? Localization. It'd be useful instead of saying this, say something like the product will be localizable and
very good point. Most of the examples that I am showing you comes from previous classes, come from students like you. So far, we haven't reviewed the template to document requirements. So far, I am not speaking to you, or I am not showing you correct ways to write a requirement. I am showing you ideas, and we're categorizing those ideas, but we need to talk about the format, and we need to talk about the language, and I need to talk about that paper that hopefully you already read, or you are going to read later. But yes, the language is going to be important, the format is going to be important, the template in order to represent information is going to be important. Right now, it's not there. It's just paragraphs from previous people. Moreover, I am going to show you more examples like this. So it's important, not something that we covered so far. Good. The last one.
Not be modified unless
In terms of the language, is the most complicated one. Can we extract from that last one something that could become a requirement? Because right now, I agree with you, it's kind of very hard to put that as the thing that we have reviewed. However, we're talking with the customer tell me this. Can we extract from there some requirement? You can put the things in both ways. Remember, quality or constraints, you can express what the system should do or what the system should not do or should have or should not have. The best way, good question, the best way to put things is in an affirmative way, what the system should do or should have. It's a bad idea to express something like not this. However, again, my goal right now is for you to look to some paragraph and extract something that could be useful for documenting the project. So if some customer tell you this or put this in an email or something, can we extract a requirement? Yes or no? And what could be that?
Language. That's what exactly have a specific
yes. That one could be a constraint. Could be. It is not right now. Right now, the main problem there is negotiation. The main problem there is not clear. The main problem there is not a requirement because these invest principles that we reviewed at the beginning. Now, our goal, our responsibility is try to fix it. Fix it. Try to understand the customer. Remember the communication problem is there is some reason because the customer is mentioning this garbage. I need to try to understand. And when I understand, then I can transform this thing, these lines, in some requirements. And if I do that, that requirement in particular, the one that I am looking forward is non-functional, or is going to be non-functional constraint. The constraint, can we transform that one in something about reuse of software? In something about being able to work with or connect with some particular system framework platform that already exists? This idea about do not modify the system, really what I am speaking to you, or what I, as a customer, I am trying to tell you is, I have this model or this system that someone else developed for doing payments or doing whatever. And what I am asking you to do is to create a new piece of software, but your piece of software should work with that guy, communicate with that guy. I am not asking you to create a new system for payments or whatever. It's use the one that I already have, because I do not want to pay you more for developing the full thing. So it's not functional, could become non-functional. It's going to be a constraint. And the constraint is one way or another, as a team, we need to learn how to communicate with that other system. After talking with the customer, can we transform these crazy things, non-negotiable, to that idea that I just described? Remember, engineering, your goal, information to requirement, either functional or not, your work. Make something, invest, valuable, negotiable, estimation, testing, small, and so on. But that is your work. Good? Okay. All of these can become non-functional. Not all of them are examples of non-functional. Big parenthesis note for the record. These examples, if I ask you in your exam, your final exam, your midterm, guys, can you give me an example of a non-functional requirement? And by any chance you memorize my slide and you put this as an example, this is not an example. We just mentioned that this is wrong. And we just mentioned, you tell me that this should be fixed. And I am letting to you to fix it, right? So if you make an appeal about, Professor, it's in your slides, and you mention non-functional, I mentioned like a case that we review for something that could become functional, but is not functional. Recorded. I give you another slide with the things that you already mentioned. Non-functional, all of them. Now, moving forward. You know what? it could be very simple, or it's very simple to give you examples of correct requirements, correct functional and correct non-functionals. The hardest part for students, my experience, is to identify errors, right? So I want to give you examples of errors, or I want to ask you to help me to identify those errors, because if you're able to identify the errors in some examples, you are not going to make those errors later in your work or in your evaluations. So following the same principle, I am going to show you slides, and I am going to use some colors, and I am going to ask for your help to identify errors. Now, I am going to use this game. I ask students like you one semester ago, guys, help me with the requirements for the Pac-Man video game. I want to show you the answers that I received. And you are going to help me to grade those answers. They are correct or not? If yes, good. If not, I am going to ask you, help me to fix it. Clear? They are not correct. They are from students like you. We're going to review them. So do not memorize them. Moreover, one of the 3 projects that I am going to ask you to work in your homework is this one. Are you going to ask us to do the requirements of something that we're going to review here in the classroom? Yes, because I am going to show you errors. Hopefully you give me something that next semester I can show as a correct answers instead of errors. Good? So do not copy paste the one that I am giving you, because the one that I am giving you are errors. As I mentioned before, copy paste. So the numbers are from the submission that the student did. Not my numbers. Do not try to make sense of the numbers. Use copy paste of PDFs. Copy paste of PDFs. Number 5. All of them requirements for the Pac-Man. Number 5, is a requirement, yes or no? Number 7, is a requirement, yes or no? Number 5 and number 7, they are talking about something that is connected. They could be considered similar or maybe the same, I don't know.
A description of.
Let me tell you my grading feedback. I think that the number 5, as you agree with me, is a functional requirement. We can have an issue there with the 4 degrees of freedom. That part maybe can be explained in a different way, but so far it can be understood. Worst case scenario, we need to search what is the meaning of that. And okay, I can agree that it's up, down, left, right. So makes sense. The 7 looks like also a requirement that is functional. The Pac-Man, navigate the maze, arrow keys, left, right, right? You know what is the problem? 5 looks fine. 7 looks fine. But this is the same homework. You are listing 2 times the same service functionality or whatever. So your report is okay in terms of requirements, but you are repeating requirements. Do not do that. That is an issue. Like, why you put the same thing in 2 different ways to explain? We're going to review that. I am going to talk about that more, but yes, right now we haven't reviewed the template for explaining things, but something that is going to happen later, just to answer the question. Remember this idea of the title for the requirement. The title for this requirement, either 5 or 7, is moving the Pac-Man. If we look for the title, the name for the requirement, what we are talking about, moving the Pac-Man, that is the idea, the key thing that we can use as a header, right? Later in the description could contain all these ideas about the arrow keys, left, right, and so on, or even the mouse also, whatever. All that explanation can be inside in the paragraph, and we can just work with moving the Pac-Man as the title of the requirement kind of the presentation, right? So I agree with that. We need to review that.
There's multiple sentences and functional and non-functional combinations.
Split.
Both the definitions of like how it should behave, what it should not behave, how it should react, how it should behave, and you contradict one statement versus another statement.
Very good point. It's going to happen the following. You're going to have requirements that are going to be connected. When you have requirements that are going to be connected, for instance, we're talking about moving the Pac-Man. And probably later, we're going to talk about moving the Pac-Man fast. Fast meaning 60 frames per second, 6 or 30 frames per second, or in less than 1 second should react, whatever. You're going to have this non-functional and you're going to have this functional. What you can do, what you should do, and we're going to review this, is here in the functional, instead of telling me again that this guy should move fast, the only thing that you need is to reference, to connect with this non-functional. The movement should be as described in non-functional requirement 1 or 5 or whatever. It's just a connection, and here is the explanation of this speed requirement or frame per second requirement or whatever. So just connect the text. And obviously, you need to be careful that never you have a contradiction, because if you have a contradiction, something is not clear, something is not negotiable. We're going to have help from pictures, diagrams, because now that you're talking about the connection between requirements, that connections are easy to show in a diagram that using a long document. You can do it with the document, references, connections, but the diagram is going to help us more. We need to review that. Clear. Think about the network. The only thing that I am mentioning right now to you is the nodes, how to have good nodes. We need to move to the connection between the nodes later, and it's going to happen. 5 and 7, only one requirement and one title, one description, the description as detailed as you can or you need it. So that is my problem with 5 and 6. As I mentioned in the lecture 1, every time that you have something in red, I am giving you kind of the idea there is a problem here, check it. Or this is important, whatever. In these cases, more than important, it's important because it's wrong. So 5 and 7, that was. What do you think about the 8?
It be a part of others, 7 and 5, because either way we have direction.
I agree with the idea of an activity, and therefore it's going to be part of another one, something else. How do you know that it's an activity? How do you know that it's going to be part of something else? And hopefully something that gives you a hint is the fact that I put something in red.
Condition.
The condition, the if. Did you notice the rectangle, right? And if is something that later is going to become one sentence or a couple of sentences, right? I mean, could be a very long condition, and therefore you're going to split. We don't care about that part, but it's a sentence, it's an instruction or a couple of other instructions that are going to be inside of a method. So that is going to be an activity. That should be something inside of a requirement. That is a detail for the requirement, not a requirement per se. You're going to have a lot of ifs when you're talking with the user. If this, then do this. If that, do that. If. All of that, activities. Your work is to put those activities enclosed in one requirement or maybe more, but the requirement should be something that encloses those activities, not the activity per se. So number 8, activity, done. And you need to move to some place. 9.
Define what the course is.
I agree with that.
An activity, but defining the activity of particular, like telling the ghost that it'll move in this way. It's not a.
I agree with your points. Let me show you, or let me tell you my description of the solution. This is wrong. This is wrong because the fact that we are talking about problems, we do not agree quickly like, okay, that is good, is because that one is not negotiable. There are issues there with the clarity. Again, something that is clear, something that is not ambiguous, should be something that you and your friend understand the same way quickly. If you or your friend or someone else have like, what is happening here? Probably something is wrong with the requirement. Something is wrong with the documentation, with the explanation, with the elements, whatever. Let me tell you what is wrong here. You know the Pac-Man, right? If you tell me number 9, it is hard to understand. What you are trying to tell me is 2 things. On the one side, for the first time, you're introducing the ghost. For the first time, you are telling me, because again, this is a copy paste of one homework, so that is the number 9, is you are telling me about ghost. You are telling me that there is going to be an enemy in the game, and that the enemy are going to be the ghost, or that is the name that you're going to use. So you're trying to tell me that those guys, the antagonist, should be there. But on the other side, you're talking about they are going to move. They are going to chase the main character. I want you to identify the difference between telling me that you're going to have a ghost and telling me that there is going to be moving the ghost. In the same way, apply for the Pac-Man. One thing is you want a Pac-Man, and another thing, different thing is you want the Pac-Man to move. Why? Because in the 5 and the 7, one thing is talking about there is going to be a Pac-Man, and the Pac-Man is going to move with the keyboard. But you didn't tell me what is a Pac-Man. Right now, you're talking about the Pac-Man in the same way that I am talking about the Pac-Man because we already know the game. But the correct thing to do, what is going to happen in the requirement is, number 1 is moving. Number 2, I need to draw that character on the screen. Think about any other game. Talk with your friends about a game that you maybe do not know. You can figure out a name. And you're going to explain that game to someone that is not familiar with your gaming preferences. And then you're going to explain that there is a main character, call it whatever. And that main character do something. But then you need to explain how that character look like. And the character itself, the appearance of the character and the actions of the character are 2 different things. Thinking about implementation, the Pac-Man itself, I can ask a developer to create the Pac-Man. And that developer is the one that is going to create the yellow circle and the animation for, the eyes. That is an activity per se. I am thinking about a Pac-Man in 2D, but I can maybe go for a 3D Pac-Man, and then there is a problem there. And another developer, a different one, is the one that is going to work with this idea of the movement. That for the Pac-Man is easy, the listeners, and these 2 requirements, drawing the Pac-Man and moving the Pac-Man, are going to connect. Because this guy maybe is going to call that object, and is going to pass as a parameter the XY coordinates, and voila. 2 developers, 2 different things to do. For the ghost, it's exactly the same idea. You are telling me that there is going to be a ghost. And details is that you want to have 4. Moreover, you can talk about the colors of those 4. You can tell me about the different things that you want in those 4. There is this ghost that is pink or orange or blah, blah, blah. And you know what? In some point, those guys are going to be blue and scared. And all of that is about having the ghost or drawing the ghost or presenting the ghost. And there are several details that you need to provide to me about how to draw or present or introduce this ghost. Think about it. It's your class ghost with all the different methods and all the different things that you need to do there. On the other side, if you want to talk about the movement of the ghost, you already tell me that there are going to be 4. In the other, Probably you're going to describe to me how they move. And one thing that you're going to research is those 4 guys do not move in the same way. Each of them move in a different way, and maybe you're going to identify them by the color or by the name, and you're going to do a full explanation of how they move. That is more complicated than the Pac-Man. My point, that number 9. Is something that later we're going to call an epic. Is something that is more than one requirement there, is not clear, is a lot of information missing, is just the first talk about a topic, but our goal is, okay, tell me more, and probably that more is going to split in 2 requirements at least, and a lot of activities or a lot of details that connect those. Makes sense? And all of them are going to be functionalities. Good? Next. Yeah.
So are you suggesting that you should first describe then describe it?
In particular, for a game like this one, yes. Why? Because again, I am considering that the drawing of the character for a game is an activity that is complex itself. Very good question, because later we're going to review some systems. And in those systems, no games, you are going to have the opportunity to process information and show results. For that show results, I am not going to consider showing results or printing results a requirement, because it's just a print instruction. However, I am considering drawing a Pac-Man or drawing a ghost a requirement, because it's not only one draw instruction, but something more complex. For the Pac-Man, for the ghost, I am considering that they are going to be classes, thinking as a developer. For the printing the results, I am considering that it's going to be used system out, println, something. Activity, requirement.
Showing the result. Showing the result.
That could go to a requirement, yes. Think about printing the results or showing the results in, you're using a log library. And the log library allows you to show the results, printing on the console, or create an HTML web page, or sending the result to an address, an email, or whatever. When we move to that direction, complexity, it's like, okay, now it's not going to be used as system out println, it's going to be something else, several methods maybe for several different ways to show the results, move to a requirement. Something small, something that is an instruction or an activity can evolve to a requirement if the complexity increases.
For the midterm, are you going to give us examples that are wrong?
I'm going to give you, and I am going to show you later this, I am going to give you a paragraph that describes a system, and I am going to ask you for this paragraph or from this paragraph, can you extract the requirements? And I already know that the paragraph have 5 or 6, so I am expecting you to localize those, and obviously localize them in a good way and show them in a good way. That is, I am going to ask you for diagrams, something that we're going to review later. How exactly? Again, I know that there are 6. I am expecting you to give me at least 5. Less than 5, you're going to have partial credit, but some penalization because you're missing things. If you give me more than 6, like you give me 10 or 20, you are going to be penalized, because again, it's like you're giving me activities, not requirements. So I am trying to evaluate that you have the idea, the sense of what is happening, what should be correct.
So for every class that I'm taking, I like 5 minimum.
I am not giving you a number, but yes, usually what I do is I know that there are 6 and I am expecting 5. So I am not expecting you to do everything 100% correct, but have a very good idea. It's going to change according with the question, but something like that. I give you 7, 6. I ask you for all the ones that you can find, I am going to grade 5, like 100% correctly. Okay, you make it. Sorry, I can. I am going to show you, don't worry. So, but yes, the idea is that is what the system is going to do, service, functionalities, reactions, behaviors, right?
Which chapter is for the diagrams? Is it going to be the requirements book or is it going to be Somerville?
It's going to be our next lecture, and connecting with what we're talking today is today, previous weeks, I am talking about correct notes, like the individual parts are good. The next thing that we need to do is to connect these parts. We're going to create this kind of network of requirements. And in order to represent that, diagrams are going to be our tool. I am going to talk about use case diagrams later. Next lecture. Don't worry. Good? Okay, so some ideas about what I mentioned before, like the goes into requirements, the move is the main requirement for the Pacman. The other things are kind of activities. And also for the Pacman, show the Pacman on the screen and some specifications. So the same thing that we talk here, I just give you a summary in a slide in case you want to review it later. I do not put everything that we talk. Our conversation is bigger than just my slides, but those are things that I am guessing we're going to talk during the lecture. So I just put there for you later review, but everything that we talk apply. Next, again, a student, your homework. Someone told me non-functional requirements for the Pacman. 1, 2, 3, 4. What do you think?
First one is 3 non-functional requirements. If we change the language, like high-speed responsive platforms, we change like for platforms, depending on what all platforms we require, like cross-platform. For high speed, we need to again define like what's the high speed, and responsive should be the time in which
All of them should be separated.
Okay.
All of them are ambiguous.
Number 1, you agree with me that this answer is not correct. And it is. So number 1, if you provide this answer, is not correct. They are not requirements because they are not clear. You are immediately pointing out like, hey, are issues. So number 1, this is not fine. These can become non-functional requirements. That is the thing that you are noticing. They can be, but they are not right now. Probably my main point here, this answer in a quiz, in an exam, or in your homework is not 100% correct. It's not correct. You are not considering invest. Clear? You have the idea, but it's not fine. It is not fine because we already talked before about adjectives. And we already talked about the ambiguity of just mention the adjective without the possibility to measure that adjective. Right? Do not do this in your homework. Because if you do this in your homework, that shows me that you are not here during the lecture, that you have no idea of all the things that we have been mentioning a lot. Number 1, high speed, responsive, and platforms. Those look like 3 different things, and the 3 of them need to be clarified. One requirement is about the speed, and you need to tell me exactly what do you mean about the speed. It's about the frames per second, it's about the reaction of the Pacman, the ghost, whatever. Tell me more about the speed, and that is going to become one non-functional. Second, you're talking about responsiveness. Robustness or timing also. So this is connected with the previous one. It's the same as the previous one, used with a different wording, or is something different. Whatever. If it's something different, it's a second one, and you need to specify how are you going to test it. Because in explaining or thinking about how are you going to test it, probably you're going to provide more details about what you are talking about. Platforms. This can go back to the idea of develop the Pacman in Java or do the Pacman for the web. I mean, again, tell me more about what do you want. Looks like portability, and that is another requirement and should be explained about portability. 3 in one line, because there are 3 adjectives, but they are unclear. They should be clarified.
So, in terms of size, etc.
Do not use etc. because that is ambiguous. You can list them, one in each bullet. List portability, list speed, performance, list responsiveness or robustness in another line. So separate them, never the etc. That is totally ambiguous, like your etc. means 1 more, 2 more, 3 more, 4 more. Do not put that in a contract. That is our idea. And each of them separate and take care of the negotiable. In particular, think about what are you going to do to test those things, to show the customer that you did that thing. Very good point. If you identify something that is non-functional, if you identify something like this, adjectives are going to be non-functional. Usually the non-functional are not connected in a talk with activities. Usually the non-functional, each of them are going to become per se requirements. Because think about it, the activities for this high speed, everything should happen in less than a second. The activities per se are going to be activities inside of the functional requirements in which that speed is required, like moving the Pacman or moving the ghost or other things. So the activities are going to become part of the activities of the functional requirements, not here. Things that are qualities or constraints, things that are adjectives, are good candidates usually for non-functional, but split them in more than one. The one is 3, but the most important thing, testing. It is not negotiable because nothing there mentioned how they are going to be tested or what is the meaning of those adjectives that you have there. Clear?
So, that does not apply for none, but it does apply.
It's applied also to the non-functional because, again, this one, high speed, we're checking for how this is going to be tested, and testing is one of the best principles. Also, we're reviewing that is not negotiable, so on. They are going to apply. Some of them are going to be harder to evaluate or by default there, like independent. Something that we are detecting there is 3 things that they should be independent. You can argue that these 3 should be split in 3 requirements because they are independent or to become independent. That is one reason for the splitting. So yes, check the invest even in those requirements that you detect are non-functional, or you know they are going to become non-functional after you fix them.
So if it just said the game able to run across all platforms, that's
that looks okay. But something that I will fix there is the system should be able to run across all platforms. I will remove the all and probably list which platform do you want. The one that you mentioned is fine. It's one requirement, is non-functional because it's a constraint. The only thing to make clear specification, this all platform, be careful in a contract because when you mention all, what happens if by any chance there is a platform that you do not know, but you are committing to all, so should include that one. So it's better to say Mac and Windows, if that is the idea, or Berry Pie, or I don't know, things that you want to do.
Samsung Smart Grid.
Yeah, so remember, all these ideas are for a contract, so you do not want to put there things that later can be used against you. So that is the idea. You are covering yourselves. Next. The 2 is only one, timely manner. We already talked about similar to this. What is timely manner? You need to tell me numbers. It's about the speed numbers. 3
What about highly reliable?
What?
Highly reliable, number 2.
Similar. I just missed the box, but this is another one. This one is connected with this one, or I will put them to connected in one different requirement. Reliability or robustness or something like that. Similar problem, yes. And you should split here.
But then first and second to be together, sort of. Responsiveness and reliability, they are not exactly the same thing. Two different things.
Separate things. So right now could be this one 3 and this one 2, and all the 5 need an explanation of how they are going to be tested. And I do not know if for a Pac-Man video game, the user, the customer, need to talk about this and this like 2 separate things, or if maybe after talking with the customer is, okay, the only thing that you need is this, that could be only one of them, or one word to summarize both of them together. Because again, it's a game. It's like this robustness idea do not apply, but so far here, 5, and the 5 need clarification. 3, yeah.
So when you do when you say run across all platforms, is that a not required? Because it's not specifying what.
The thing that I mentioned there is it can be a requirement run on platforms. It's a portability requirement, but you need to fix what doesn't mean all platforms. It should run on a Mac or on Windows, or it should run in web pages, or it should run, you need to specify where. So when I mention platforms, that gives me an idea of non-functional, but I need to be more clear about where, which one. Run across all platforms, that will be not a requirement. It's an error, it's unclear. Because remember, the first thing that you do is invest. Is invest, yes or no? If one of the letters of invest is not checked, it's not a requirement. Now, some questions in your exam, and it's a good point, are going to be, just tell me, is a requirement or not? And if I ask you, is a requirement or not, yes, no, all of this, no. Because all of them have issues. Professor, but we can fix it. Yeah, next question is going to be maybe fix it. But the question about is a requirement is the question about all the invest letters. Are there? Yes or no? And for these guys, at least one letter is missing, if not more than one. Testing is missing in all of them. Negotiable is missing in several of them. And I can continue. Independent is missing in the first one, and so on. Good? But should be invest even if they are non-functional.
In the second one, let's say we have highly reliable and timely manner. After that, can you explain they were storing previous records in the database? How do we that to be a requirement? Can we like extract that to be a different requirement, or is that a part of another requirement?
You are making the points. If I read this, number one, imagine that you're going to have your list of functionalities and you're going to have your list of non-functional requirements. So far, from the first one, you detect 1, 2, 3 that could be non-functional, but you need to fix it. Agree? For the second one, you detect 2 that could be non-functional, but you need to fix it. For the same 2, there is a mention about the database. A database. Storing something in the database. Help me. Storing something in the database is a non-functional requirement. Okay, so this 2 is wrong, very wrong. What should be this store, whatever, because previous record is not telling me anything. And remember, this is the homework for the Pac-Man. So, like, what are you talking about previous record in the Pac-Man? Moreover, you are talking about a database. Do you really want to have a database in the Pac-Man? Well, okay, the file for the scores. Whatever you're trying to tell me there about this database, is something that you need to improve, but that something is one functional requirement that you are trying to describe here. What was the idea of your classmate here? I don't know, maybe the requirement that we had before about the scores, storing the scores of the games. Maybe, I am guessing, right? I need to talk with my customer. In this case, I need to talk with the student, like, what is this? For this homework, the only thing that I know is there is a lot of things that are not independent, not testing, non-negotiable. And moreover, in that number 2, there is a functional requirement listed as a non-functional. So you can imagine my feedback when I return the homework, the TA. So, good point.
And now let's say we're talking about requirements. We have like when the packman touches the coin, thereby storing the previous records in the database. Now, is that an activity of touching the coin, that collision?
Yes.
What is it? Office hours?
Send an email to him. I think it's by appointment.
They did not mention previous record. They mentioned the high scores storing a file. Going to be a functional requirement, right?
Yeah, the idea that there is a database here give me the idea that it's going to be functional, but all this sentence should be redone. You need to redo this because, again, previous record is totally ambiguous, totally not negotiable, and probably one fix there could be this idea of mentioning the scores. Need to be fixed. Just like this is wrong. It's a suggestion that could be functional because of the database, that's it. But you need to explain me more, what do you want to do with the database? What do you want to store there? And why a database? And maybe instead of database, you are trying to say a file. I mean, database is kind of a high word to use for a Pac-Man game. But again, common errors. What do you think about the number 3? What?
Not correct. P218, P2.
I think it's more about accessibility than age. You set a minimum bound, but you've not said who can use it. Age 3 and above could be people who have accessibility issues, who cannot use a keyboard or a mouse. Age 3 and above is not efficient enough. It's not a tight enough constraint.
It is not negotiable. My point for the 3, as you mentioned.
Might be an external force which can be preventing the 3+ category, right? For example, the government or what.
The point here is, if the customer, I am the customer, and I told you whatever you are going to do should work with kids of 3 and plus, the first question that you are going to ask me is like, what are you expecting from a kid of 3? It's like, what kind of things you assume or you know that a kid of that age is going to be able to do or do not be able to do, and therefore what exactly is what you are asking me here to do. It could be all about the size of the letters. It could be all about the size of the Pac-Man or the ghost or the visualization of something. I do not know. But this information of the age is probably for someone else could be clear what a kid of this age is able to do. But no one expected you developers know that. Therefore, this should be clarified.
That is a factor, like violence or rating that.
Well, the point here is, for something like that, we have a common understanding of the meaning, right? Like the rating. If we're going to use that, this is rate as mature, or it's going to be, it's a game and it's going to be or should be rate as PG-13, then we know what is our constraint. Our constraint is do not show or do not do, or that we have an understanding because we're mentioning a standard, right? So the only thing that I need to do is to go and check the standard. My point here is you are not telling me about a standard, you are telling me about an age. And if you can reference to me some kind of standard or document tell me exactly what you expect of this age, then we can move forward and just put in the reference, okay, according with this document. As we mentioned before, follow FERPA or follow this Disability Act or follow, give me a reference to a document in which I can know what are you talking about. Again, if this is a video game and you tell me that the classification should be PG-13, done. With that, I can go and check the document and understand exactly what I cannot do in order to keep the game in that category. That is what we need. And that is negotiable.
Basically, you're saying instead of plus, we should use standard over there. In that case,
yeah, because the problem that I have there is about negotiation. The problem that I have there is ambiguity. But when you mention a standard is read the standard, I read the standard is telling me what to do. Good. The last one. Something about the source code is functional, not functional. Tricky question.
So I guess the question is,
what you are telling me is that one is valuable, and we'll go back to the invest, right? Have some value for the customer that your source code is well documented. Again, talking about common software systems, unless what you are developing is a library or something very, very specific, but 99% of the time, if you're developing an application, a piece of software for a customer, your customer don't care about your source code. So asking for the source code to be well documented is not a requirement. Forget about functional or not functional. It's not a requirement because the customer is not going to ask you for that. But my manager is asking me, the professor is asking me, whatever your professor or the manager asks you to do is a specification, is following the rules, is whatever you want to call it, not a requirement. Requirements involve the customer, the client, and documentation in the source code is not that. Any line that you read and the line is about the source code, not a requirement. That number 4, out. Unless your product is a library and the library needs the documentation because you are going to generate the API. But it's not going to be the case in any of the questions, your quizzes or exams. It's not going to be the case in this class. But again, it's the only possible exception. Good? Yeah.
So we were talking about this. Let's say I'm a game developer. So right now, for me, the customer is that person over there who just asked me to use it, or the whole people who will be playing it. Because if we are looking at through that lens, then the last one is again a documentation that someone is asking because I need to keep them. For me, they are my customer.
Okay, very good point. Very good point. Customer is the people that is paying for the game. So in this scenario in which I ask you to do the game, I am your customer. Who is going to play the game? Maybe my students in the following class or something like that. You should not be concerned about them unless I invite them to be here in the meeting and talk about the requirements. But if that is not the case, you cannot think about all the users that I am going to put in that game. I am your customer, or we are the customers if I invite them to be here. So you identify your customers, and the only thing that you need to be worried about is what we ask you explicitly to do. This common error, very common error, is that we start as a developers imagining all the different things that we can do, or all the different things that maybe the customer is not asking about, but I can give the customer this or that. Is the Pac-Man video game, but it's been asked for a professor in ASU. It could be a good idea to put the Sparky dancing inside of the Pac-Man video game. It could be cool, but it's not what the customer is asking for. Let's change the Pac-Man for the Sparky and the Ghost for the customer is asking you for the Pac-Man. Forget about the Sparky. It will be cool. Yes, good idea, the one that you have, but you are not the customer. The customer is a different person. So use the customer. Now, you can explain or you can put your ideas on the table when you talk with the customer. If the customer tell you, oh, I like that idea, then that could become a requirement. But the idea becomes an idea of the customer, even though you suggest, but the customer is the one that, yes, I take it, I make it mine. So the customer is finally the responsible, your customer, the people talking with you. Not what you imagine, not what could happen or what could be. Don't do that. Good?
So for reference of this example pattern, should we just imagine ourselves as the one who don't
Yeah, it's just like that. It's a company that is asking you to do the Pac-Man, a new one, unless an example that we mentioned before is like, I would like to put the Pac-Man in my web page, and I don't want you to do it. You search a way to put it there, embed something that already exists. Then we do not need to describe all the requirements. Again, if you are going to do something that is a black box that you are going to reuse, that black box is one requirement. You are going to use data structures in your system. You do not need to put in your requirements that you need this linked list, tree, blah, 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 blah. You are going to develop those things, or is just you're going to use the library collection? If it's going to be a library, it's usually one requirement or one thing to mention, or even talking about the source code, nothing to mention about it, but never all the details. If you are going to embed the Pac-Man and you are not developing the Pac-Man, you're just going to take a version that already exists, free version, and put in a web page, that is one requirement. You do not need to specify all the things that I am giving to you. Your homework is assuming that I am asking you to implement the Pac-Man, that I am the company that developed the Pac-Man and you're going to be part of my team. Make sense? Okay. Anything about the code is not a requirement. Remember that. What do you think about the scenario number 2? For the question in the chat, that is correct. The number 3 in the previous slide, you cannot test. That is right. Now, for these ones.
And previous slide, the last one, asks for document.
What could be a reason? That is a position that you need to analyze, but usually in a common scenario, the customer is not going to ask for that because the customer do not see the source code. Now, here is very important to identify when you have a professor or an instructor, and that instructor asks you to do a piece of software, and I ask you for documentation. You remember that professor, that instructor is not really a customer because he's not asking you for a piece of software that I am going to sell or reuse. When I ask you for documentation, or your teacher, instructor, and so on ask you for documentation, it's for evaluation purposes, not acting as a customer. It's not what is going to happen outside. When your manager, if you're working for a company, that manager asks you for documentation, or the rules of the company imply documentation, that is not the customer asking for that. Your customer is not your manager, is not the company. The company is part of your team, but the customer is someone outside. Thinking about you're going to work for Facebook, and the company is going to ask you for documentation, or your manager is going to ask you for documentation. Your customer is not Facebook. Your customer is not Mark Zuckerberg. Your customer is the people that is going to use Facebook. And I asked you before, do not think about all the different people. You have one customer, one representation of one model or idea of who is the customer, who is the people that you are approaching with whatever you are developing. So customer outside the user, and you have a clear idea of who is that user. Documentation, the company is going to ask you for, the professor is going to ask you for, that is not the customer. You are users of Facebook. Did you ask or care about the source code to be documented? As a user, no. Maybe as a developer, and that is one part of your brain is thinking about this is documented. It's a different idea.
And wants like
that is the scenario that I described before. Like 99% of the time, you're going to be working in a product, and that product don't care about documentation. That is the kind of ideas that we're going to review here. However, one particular scenario, you are working for a company that is developing a framework. You are not developing a product. You are developing a library or a platform or something that is going to be used for other developers. You are working for any kind of, you're working with Google, but not in the product, in the search thing, but in all these tools that Google provides to developers. In that particular scenario, documentation is something that you want to have as a non-functional requirement, because that documentation is going to become this web page with the API thing. So in that particular scenario, yes, your customer wants the documentation, because again, it's going to become the manual that they follow. In that particular scenario, documentation, non-functional requirement, check. Remember the context. Now, for the exam, for your quizzes, I am not going to move in that direction. I am not assuming never that you are doing a library or a platform, because it's 1% of the time. It's a very particular job that you can get. I am going to assume scenarios in which you are developing products. And therefore, in that scenarios, 99% of the scenarios, documentation is something that the customer don't care about it. Clear?
In this case, can you imagine it like we do not provide X, let's say, instead of documentation, anything. Does it matter to them or not? Like, it was something that was like documentation is something that a customer like, I don't require it really, but if you don't have a Pac-Man and Pac-Man game, then can we imagine it like that?
You can imagine that, and you need to specify that in your contract. Again, if we discover that is a requirement because a particular context or a particular situation or a particular project, that is okay. That is something that you need to put there, and in the details, put all that explanation of why was required, the documentation, why it's important, and how are you going to prove that you did it. Maybe even the format, if they are asking you for Java documentation, not only one line or multi-block comment, you can put that. But again, in a particular context, that is, you are developing this something in which the customers are going to be developers. Basically, if your customer is a developer, makes sense that you ask for documentation or you ask for technical things. You have a technical customer. But if we're talking about customers, like the players of the Pac-Man, common people, they never are going to look at the source code. Therefore, you do not need to ask for something that they are never going to be using, or they don't care about it. They are not going to notice. You need to check your context. If you change the context, the answer, the requirement could be there. But in the general scenario, mostly of the scenarios, applications, is not going to be there. For your exam, I am going to tell you explicitly, you are developing an application for the web similar to Canvas. It's going to be used by students in the university. That is my context. And I am going to ask you, document the source code. Is a requirement, yes or no? And for that particular thing, the users are you using Canvas. You care about the documentation. You're going to ask for the documentation. The documentation is a functional and non-functional. And in that particular scenario, you're going to notice that documentation, really? Nothing. You are thinking about other scenarios, the libraries, different idea. Clear? Similar thing is going to happen with the speed. To be honest, there is a requirement for the speed in the Pac-Man. We mentioned a lot. Probably one thing that you can do for the Pac-Man in terms of the speed is the frames per second. That is the thing that maybe you want to mention if you're doing a game and that is the particular scenario. But this idea of how fast the Pac-Man or the game should be loading, most of the time is up to your computer and the requirements that you put there for the game. You're not going to ask for a particular timing. Again, you can do it, but it's not going to be there for the Pac-Man and other small games. Think about your context is important. And for your exam, if the context is Canvas, my ASU, Facebook as a user, and so on, the source code is not going to be a requirement, anything related with the source code. Good. Moving, what do you think about this for? Can you agree that all of them looks like activities? But moreover, we're talking about the Pacman. All of those things make sense for the Pacman. The system should include a start and end point of the path, which loop to one another. Can you explain me what is this number one?
This has a loop. So, if the start and end points of the path has to be same, has to be circular. Right? So
that is exactly my point. When we talk about something like that, that basically means we do not understand line number one in the way that is there. And if we do not understand line number one, we agree that that one is not clear, therefore that one is not negotiable, therefore that one is not a requirement, period. Moreover, that one looks more like an activity if we try to understand what is happening there. My recommendation, guys, when you submit your homework, if you put that number one there, I do not know where that comes from, but probably it's going to be like wrong. Did you notice that I am showing you errors because I am asking you for a homework and basically I am begging you, do not make the same mistake. Put the player in a particular position is an activity, right? Because it's basically the initialization of the variables. But moreover, I'm not sure if we put the player at the top. Because the player is the Pacman, right? And the Pacman is at the center. Careful with what you put. Change the number of ghosts. We do not change the number of ghosts. Maybe that one refers to the fact that the ghosts die and we need to do something with the ghost die or collision or something like that. But this is not exactly the thing that you explained for the Pacman, right? Changing the number of the ghosts, no.
It's not negotiable. It's referring to the fact that later levels, all four ghosts will be roaming the maze, whereas in the first level, are. But
you make my point with that. Maybe if you read something and you have some, well, this maybe it is not negotiable because it is not clear. So the last one. You are trying to describe the end of the game. However, it's not exactly that true. The game is going to end when the Pacman die, but there is a number of times that the Pacman should die before something, right? So homework, let me quickly move things that you can review, but your homework, I am asking you to do the requirement specifications, some document like this one, for number one, the Pacman. Yes, the Pacman. Number two, this game. Did we know the game?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and number three, this game. And this game, probably you do not know the game, but I am giving you the URL in which you can go and read the explanation of the game. That is going to be something like this page. So Pacman, Space Invaders, and this crazy game of life. I am asking you for the requirements of those systems as you did before. Clear? Question here.
do you provide like a template for us for this document?
Not yet. What I am asking you is the requirements, no template provided. So I want to check, what do you do? Next lecture, we start with the templates, but I am not assuming, I am not asking you to use any template yet. Use natural language, English, you for everything. Describe the game in a document of requirements, full game. Good? See you next lecture, guys. Thank you.